should have a strategy for social media. You should have a strategy for client acquisition and the sales. Like, you need strategies for all of those. You may not use every move every time. I think you're going to have one or two finishing moves, if you will, right, that are going to be your go-to. But I find that people are too quick to say, oh, I do it this way only. And I just don't believe, why would you ever limit yourself to that? So I agree. Whatever your primary move is, systematize that, but don't overlook the ones that you haven't done yet just because you haven't done them yet.
Welcome, ModelFA's David DeSell here, the host of the ModelFA podcast, as well as the president of ModelFA. And I appreciate in advance you spending some time on today's episode. And this episode is special to me. Not only is the guest fantastic, but the guest is and was a personal mentor and leader of mine as I got my career started in the financial services industry. So Aaron Miller is the managing partner of Northwestern Mutual Boston, which is a financial planning firm that focuses on helping clients both protect and prosper. Aaron spent the last 18 years working with clients, advisors, and leaders, helping them achieve their visions faster than they ever thought possible. Aaron has a unique perspective of having a successful career as both an advisor and an industry leader. And we're really going to be focusing on his leadership background in today's episode. Under his leadership as the managing partner of Northwestern Mutual Boston, they have become one of the fastest growing offices in the country. Aaron is passionate about helping others see what is possible and creating an exceptional quality of life for everyone he serves. So with that being said, Aaron, welcome to the show. Appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Yeah, man, excited. It was looking forward to this in a big way. I know you mentioned our relationship and how long it's been. So fun to kick around some ideas with you and have a chat.
Love it. So part of the reason why I was excited for everyone listening for Aaron to join the show today is I come from a very blue collar background, and I didn't really realize what wealthy people did for a profession, or what they did with, their money, or how they just acted on an everyday basis, because I just was never exposed to it. And I would say in high school to start, and then furthermore, when I started my career, is when I started to see like, oh, there's a whole nother world out there. And Aaron, you helped expose me to that. Although I do know you have a similar background, to me. So you kind of work through same process and help me through that as well. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of taking us back to a little bit about your background, like what was life like growing up, and then bring us from that point up to the point in time where, you started in the financial services industry, and we'll unpack that as we go.
Yeah, sure, Dave. So I grew up, we sort of joke and say that if we were blue collar, it means we got a promotion that day. So, we heard no a lot more than we heard yes. But, I had a very loving support system, just not traditional. I grew up in a house that had a lot of addiction issues. So for most of my childhood, I was raised by a single mom. My mom never graduated high school, and she essentially raised me and my brother, odds and ends jobs, right, waiting table, the whole nine. So similar to something you just said is I just didn't have a lens or advantage point in which to see how great life could be financially, right? Now, the interesting about that, though, is I really do feel like I had a great upbringing, right? Like I wouldn't trade the love I got. I was always supported, like the values were there. But that was an interesting part of my sort of journey, was when I got into the professional world. I know I skipped about 18 or 20 years there, but when I got into the professional world and I look back, it was almost like a culture shock in a certain way, because I started to say like, oh, wow, not only do I not know anybody with money, I don't know anybody who knows anybody with money, right? So there was like this arm's length view of what it was like to do that. But I think in a lot of ways, I'm blessed because there was sort of, I would say I had a blue collar work ethic in a white collar world. And I think that combination really helped propel me, because I was only surrounded by people who had to put in the extra mile, who had to try to get better every day because it was the only way we could survive. So that survivalist mindset, I think, did help me early on. And there were some hurdles for sure mentally, playing in the white collar world. But to me, that journey is a big part of, I think, how I was able to climb the ladder the way I did.
Love it. And yeah, I definitely think, we need to give credit where credit's due. And similar to you, very loving family, instilled great values. But from a financial or status perspective, it wasn't necessarily where we aspired to be eventually. But you just mentioned something that I want to unpack a little bit more. So in terms of the blue collar work ethic in a white collar world, I guess help me understand that a little bit more. So you come from a background where you don't know wealthy people, you don't know people that know wealthy people. You're in a model where you end up building whatever you can create on your own. Like, how did you work through those mental hurdles? What were those mental hurdles that you had to work through at the beginning stages of your career?
Great questions there. I think some of the biggest hurdles for me, I can kind of start there, and then maybe a few things that I think helped overcome them. But some of the hurdles were just personal confidence. So I think what I found was, right or wrong, I've always kind of been a fairly confident person just in myself. And for one of the first times in my life, right? So by the way, I started this business right out of school. I was 22 years old. And most of the things I had worked really hard at up to that point, I was able to be good enough at, right? Relatively successful at. And when I got into the industry, one of the biggest hurdles was, when I mentioned confidence, it was almost like I felt like I had a little bit of an imposter syndrome, because I was essentially, right, my full-time job was to help people with their money. And I really struggled when I went home saying, like, me? Right? Like, I don't know anything about money. I never had money. And that space was hard for me. And I couple that with the fact that I think, at the core, the job of a financial advisor is to acquire the best clients they can in their marketplace. And I struggled with that because the best clients in my marketplace either weren't the traditional client, or candidly, I don't know that I felt like I belonged in that next circle, or I was willing to. So from an activity standpoint, right, like I was always fine at getting people to come on board and kind of hitting the pavement, if you will. But I really struggled. It almost took me 2 or 3 years to get to a marketplace that was profitable. And I think a big part of that, candidly, was I was afraid to get there. So I think it was more mindset than it was skill set. And that really slowed my growth early on, for sure.
What was the turning point? Like, what actually happened to go from the marketplace that you grew up in to a marketplace that was more profitable? Like, was it a specific introduction that you ended up getting? Was it, I joined this networking group, or, I became a board member? Like, what was it that was like, I made it, or I'm getting there?
Yes, I'm getting there, right? Yeah. There's actually just two pretty particular things I'd point to. I mean, again, it's a whole bunch of ingredients, but two pretty big ones. One of them was I was fortunate to qualify for sort of like a Rising Stars camp through our company, something they called the Fast Track Academy. And I went to that, and I got exposed to a lot of other people across the country. And I left there with two really important things. One is I looked around the room and truly believed in my heart that there wasn't anyone in that room that was more talented than me. Mm-hmm. And I watched what they were doing and who they were doing it with. And I left there being like, wow, this really is between my ears, because I just spent 6 straight days with these people, right? And they were doing things that I knew I could do. I just hadn't had the courage to do it. So like tactically, this is probably the simplest advice I ever got. And it's almost funny when you think how simple it is. I left there with sort of a goal. We called it a breakthrough project, and I had to upgrade my mark. And I did everything the same, except at the very end of every meeting, I just started asking people, who do you know that has money? Like, I just literally had a specific dollar amount. For me at the time, it was a couple $100,000. And I did everything the same in the last 6 seconds. Say, and oh, by the way, who do you know that makes this? And all of a sudden people just said, oh, my uncle, my cousin, my brother, my neighbor. And I was just like, oh my God. Like, I was a question away for 3 years for upgrading my market. And to me, that was the first big thing. And I did, in that journey, have one very particular client that we acquired that had made, 7 figures by a long shot, more than I'd ever been in front of. And I realized that he talked to me the same, he worked with me the same, he became a big center of mine. So those two in conjunction were like those big mile markers on the journey to get out of my own headspace and start to realize that, yeah, it really was mindset over skill set.
I believe I got this saying from you, or maybe I didn't, but it's definitely has an Aaron Millerism vibe to it. And you just made me think about it again, which is you have not because you ask not. And it sounds like literally all you did was change a few words at the end of the meeting and was like, hey, let's see if this works. And I think that it's a metaphor for wherever someone is right now and where they want to be. It can literally just be one little tweak, right? One little tweak that needs to happen to actually get you over the hump.
It's really become a huge philosophy or personal belief of mine this whole idea of just constantly testing small different ways on a daily basis. I say it all the time. We have to test, learn, evolve, and upgrade. And if every single day we test something new, we evolve it to be better, and then we upgrade it, you can get 1% better over and over and over. And it doesn't actually take a Herculean effort to get there. It just takes like long, constant focus in the same direction. So yeah, I'm all about pilot testing, small tweaks, trying different things. The words, because this is how it's always been done, is like Aaron Miller's nails on a chalkboard, right? Like that's what freaks me out.
I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but it's relevant based on what you just said, as well as a book that I'm reading right now. So when you think back through school, if you fail in a lot of different school environments, it's punitive in nature, right? With like bad grades or, disciplinary stuff or whatever. Subconsciously, I feel like people are being taught that like failing is bad, right? I'm reading a book right now. I'm literally only a few chapters in, but it's called Learn to Fail. And you're basically summarizing the book and what you said you do on a daily basis, which is, go try something. You're probably going to trip and fall, but what can you actually learn from that? Adjust, do it again, or try, something again, adjust and continue to evolve over time. So, and I may be misremembering certain timeframes and percentages and whatnot when I share this, but I know that when I was working with you and under your leadership, there was a point in time where you also were still running your financial planning business. So you had the split focus of running your financial planning business as well as running an office and being a leader in that office and being in charge of knuckleheads like me, trying to make sure that, we stay between the lines and, managing all the emotions that come with a young kid starting a business. So I've laughed, I've yelled, I've cried in front of you. So we've have some history in that regard. But if I'm not mistaken, as you got into leadership and the more you elevated and escalated your leadership path, the more your business grew. And you were at the top of your career, I think ranked in like the top 3% in terms of production in your financial planning business while running an office and managing a lot of folks. So before we unpack that specifically, why even get into leadership for you? Like, what was it about leadership that excited you, that caused you to spend less time on your business that you had at that time and more time on developing other folks?
Yeah, I've been asked that a lot. I've reflected on that a lot. And I think it's, again, a whole different bunch of ingredients. But at the core, I think people in general have a little bit of an instinct around whether or not they like building things and impacting people. Now, you can do that as an advisor. You can do that as a leader, right? There's a whole bunch of ways to do that. But my instinct started to say, Aaron, when you're not in front of a client, what are you doing? Well, I found that I was helping someone in the cube to the left of me. I was raising my hand to teach a session. I was doing the behaviors of the people that were in leadership, management, whatever your firm calls it. So I started to just say, well, if I followed my behavior, it's telling me that there's something there for me that I'd be crazy not to try. So I had this internal feeling that like, well, if I'm doing this without being told to do it, it's probably because there's a reason for that, right? We tend not to voluntarily do things we either don't like or aren't good at. So as I started to do that, I think the people who were leading me at the time, they saw that and they said, there's something here, kid. That was probably 6 months in when I got into leadership. And I think what was special about it was my instinct got me into leadership. Their belief in me got me through leadership. And that combination was really important because most of the great leaders I've had the chance to either be led under or lead, at some point in their life, someone believes in them more than they believe in themselves. And my instinct got me there. Their belief in me accelerated it. And I think sometimes this is sort of, considered taboo to say when it comes to leadership, because I believe that leadership is predominantly first about impacting and building. But I also think you should monetize your skill set. And I think it's very good to want to have an exceptional quality of life for the things you're great at. So the third, kind of leg of that stool, if the first one was me having an instinct, the second was having people believe in me, the third one was the fact that I said, hey, the signs kind of say that I might be kind of good at this thing. So why would I deny my ability to monetize my gifts? that's ultimately what kind of cemented that. And then over time in this player coach role, I appreciate the kind words. I was able to sort of successfully do both at a high level. So finally, I'm being the role I'm in now, where about 5 years ago, I did get rid of my entire client base. I sold my practice and dedicated myself 100% to leadership. Eventually, it was less about those things. It was about realizing that when I woke up in the morning and I looked at my calendar, the things that kept giving me juice were every time I lead and impact somebody, and the juice around building a clientele became less impact and more dollars. And that was a sign that that was the wrong place for me to spend my energy. Look, we got to make a living. So as good as it sounds to say, do what you love and everything will happen, sort of, right? You have to get to a certain level first to be able to survive. But I think once you're there, I do believe that. I do believe that if you fall on the place that you're most passionate about, the income will come. And at some point, I just said, yeah, I'm more passionate over here. Like, this is actually where I think I could be world class. Whereas an advisor, I think I'd be pretty good. But I don't know if I'd ever be world class.
So forgive the movie quote, but I've seen it literally probably over 100 times. In The Dark Knight, when the mob's asking the Joker, well, why don't you just kill the Batman yourself? And he says, well, if you're good at something, you never do it for free. And, your leadership journey is similar in that sense. But what's cool about your leadership journey is you found yourself naturally doing stuff that a leader would do where you weren't compensated. And perhaps you were compensated, through advisors taking you out in joint work and stuff like that. But then you realize, hey, let's actually build this into the financial model, moving forward. Earlier, when you were talking about the beginning stages of financial planning business, you talked a little bit about, based on your background, you had a little bit of imposter syndrome. Did you have imposter syndrome getting into leadership as well? And if so, how'd you work through that?
I did. I had it in a different way. I think in the personal practice, I felt like I didn't belong. In the leadership side, I was appointed as a managing director abnormally young, just based on the circumstances. I was asked to take over our district before I was 26. And that's not to impress anyone, but to impress upon them that I still was figuring out like who I was as a human, right, at that age. So my imposter syndrome in leadership wasn't that I didn't think I had what it takes to be a good leader. I didn't know how to lead people older than me. So I felt like I had to act as if, right? I felt like I had to be the person that was my predecessor. Well, the person I took over for did this, so I have to go be the imposter or the chameleon and go do what they did. So it was less confident and more, it was like I was playing a role. I felt like I had to play the role of a leader. There was only one way to play that role, right? You saw one movie and you had to go play the superhero that way. And that took me a little while, probably a couple of years before I realized, like, no, the reason you were asked to do this job as early as you were was because of who you were more than what you did. And when I started flip-flopping those, right, I focused too much on what I did versus who I was. That's when I got in trouble. And eventually I realized, like, no, I was put in this position because I feel like Aaron Miller is bringing something to the table. So go run your offense. I was trying to run other people's offenses, but I wasn't them. Right. So my imposter syndrome was I was acting like an imposter versus a confidence issue. And until I became my authentic self, that's really where things started to click. My first 2 or 3 years in sort of full-time leadership or part-time leadership was nothing pretty. No one was looking at what I was doing saying like, oh, I think he's building something special. It just looked like I was a clone or a mimic of somebody else.
Yeah, I do think that there's like some give and take with, you referenced something that hit home with me because I'll share a story about coaching and leading people who are older and more experienced, more veteran than you. And you're like, well, how am I going to get this guy or gal to listen to what I have to say? So there's your own internal process that you need to work through to, build up the confidence. I left Northwestern and got into consulting, and the majority of folks that I was working with were in their 50s and 60s. They were making $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 a year, $1 million a year. And let's just say that when I first started, I was not making anywhere near that. Right. So a friend was busting my chops and he's like, what do they have to learn from you? And my snarky response was, I don't know, but they're paying me. Just as like a, hey, screw you. But I thought about that. It like made me reflect. And I think that both as a leader and the person who you're trying to lead, if both parties are open-minded, willing to listen and check their egos at the door, you can learn anything from anyone. I mean, Aaron, I don't know your kids personally. I haven't seen you since you started, really having kids and whatnot, but I'm sure you learn stuff from your kids every day, So as long as you don't have an ego and you have an open mind, there's always an opportunity to learn. So I will say for anyone who's listening right now, who is a veteran in the career and may have someone in their office or someone in their life who isn't as experienced, there's still plenty of nuggets you can learn from that person.
Yeah, I love the phrase intellectual humility, right? We got to have intellectual humility. And I think that too often we don't. We think because we got somewhere, we've made it. And the reality is there's always more, there's always better. One of my mentors and coaches, he's modified a phrase we've all heard before. What got you here won't get you there. Right? There's a whole book on that.
Yeah.
His modification is great, where he actually says, no, what got you here will block you from getting there. It hurts you, right? Never mind won't get you. It actually pushes you backwards, because very few people have the intellectual humility to say that what actually got me here was constantly learning. And if I stop that really important trait in my life, it'll block me from getting any better. So intellectual humility is a huge part of being a leader, because particularly in the leadership space, in my opinion, it's the ultimate business of human development. I think even more than being an advisor, because of what you have to talk about and how you have to get them to change behavior. You got to be humble, because no one's cracked that code ever on how to get every walk of life and every diverse background to change behavior. So anyway, it's a phrase I'm very fond of.
Love it. Probably steal that one from you too.
Please do.
Hey, ModelFAs. I know you're enjoying this conversation, but I wanted to take a quick break to talk to you about the ModelFA Accelerator. This is a unique collaboration between us and you, where we help you build a financial advising practice that you can be proud of. We focus on the foundational concepts around how to pick a niche or a specialization, how to price your services, how to construct an offer that people are going to buy, and then how to market it and sell it in a way that'll get people to sign on the dotted line and become clients of your firm, all while giving you the information to scale and set up workflows and operational processes that'll allow you to reclaim your time and build a practice that doesn't run you. So if you'd like to hear more about that, go to www.modelfa.com/accelerator or www.modelfa.com. Hover over Work With Us and click on Accelerator. Hope to see you in the program.
So we've talked a lot about, your journey, your struggles, your successes, context for everyone listening to kind of know who you are. I want to shift. And at this point in your career, you've probably seen and developed or tried to develop, I say try because not everyone in the business makes it, tried to develop hundreds of advisors at this point. And I'm sure there are certain themes that advisors tend to struggle with, regardless of if they're brand new or they're veterans. So what I want to do for the rest of the show is I want you to identify what some of those themes are. And if we're good at organizing, even though we're riffing right now, take some time on each of those themes and share some nuggets as to how to work through that. Because if they're relevant to the hundreds of folks that you've led, then they're relevant to the people listening to this show. So what are some of those themes that advisors tend to struggle with?
Yeah, good question. And I think there are some universal and some that are more relevant to tenure. And I'll kind of push around both of those. I'm going to slightly replace the word struggle with what are the things that hold people back from getting to the next step?
Yeah, like that.
Right. Now, when you're new, that's struggle, right? That's where you're at. When you're 20 years in, you're not struggling, but you are potentially being held back from that next step. And it's funny, I run study groups with all the highest level advisors, and I've run study groups with people that are 20 hours deep in the business. The one thread that has been there every time is, do they have a system to get in front of new people? Right? It's all about getting in front of enough of the right people. So you could argue that's prospecting, that's marketing, that's branding. There's a lot of different ways to do that. But I've really taken a step back and said what it really is system to see new people. And what I find is that those people that are the best at building a clientele have found a way to systematize and proceduralize how they're going to go about getting in front of, being referred to, getting introduced to those individuals. So as a new advisor, right, they may struggle with sheer volume, they may struggle with confidence, they may struggle with these different areas. As a veteran advisor, it may be marketplace, or they may just feel like they're complacent. So the way I've always tried to help people think about it, and part of this is to also demystify that it's not a silver bullet. It's not because you have the most beautifully eloquent, articulate language. I've been on a lot of work with people that I'm like, oh, that's how you do it, right? And all of a sudden their business is huge. They have a system. So I coach that your system isn't right or wrong. What's right or wrong is how well you follow it. And I think that most individuals in our industry have a really detailed system or process while they're in front of a client, and they don't put the same amount of energy to figure out how they're going to get in front of the next client. The way they phone is probably pretty similar every time. The way they do an initial approach call is really similar, but they kind of haphazardly wing their business development strategy. So I basically tell people from like a tactical takeaway standpoint, David, is actually look at your sales process, your client acquisition process, and literally overlay a business development strategy on top of it. So you don't have to let your brain, which is our biggest enemy, by the way, our brain does everything opposite that we wish it would do. Because I know you're a big reader, so you've probably read a whole bunch about that. But I would overlay everything. So in your first meeting, whatever that is, however you run your business, what is your business development strategy in meeting 1? What is it in meeting 2? What is it in meeting 3? And start to systematize it that way, because it helps divorce the emotion from the process. And I just think those have always been the people that are the greatest at it, because prospecting is very rarely, in my opinion, a factor of language. It's conviction, it's belief, it's follow through. So that to me has been a thread for everybody. So if you're a veteran advisor, right, it could be that you used to do that and you stopped, right? Or you don't have the right systems in place. If you're a new advisor, the world's coming at you so fast, there probably is no system. But tactically, I would take your sales process, overlay a second process on top of it. So like, I know that if it was meeting X, this is just what I did. I didn't have to think about it. It just became that sort of deal. So that's been a huge one. When I'm working with veteran advisors trying to get to the next level of success, and this is increasingly becoming the thing in our industry, is they just really struggle going from being a salesperson to a business owner.
I agree with you. They need to have systems for business development. And I just want to give some examples of what those systems can be, like categorically. So feel free to opine on this as well. Someone like Tyler DeMoro, who we were just talking about, his system is he's just going to bang the phone 300 times a day and cold call into an attorney market and get some referrals along the way. And that's what gives him energy. How? I have no idea. I would not be able to do that, but he's a psychopath, as you and I both know.
Yeah.
Great friend. So that's an example. You can cold call your way into a particular market. You can have a referral strategy. I have a client, his name is Austin Peterson. And actually, by the time this episode is released, his episode will already be released. I worked with him to help him launch a podcast a couple of years ago because he works primarily with business owners. So when you think about, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Business Owner, would you like me to be your financial advisor? Obviously, cutting to the chase here. A certain wall is going to go up. But if you instead say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Business Owner, I have a podcast where I highlight entrepreneurial folks like you. Would you like to come on and share your story? Much less friction to begin to start to build a relationship. And that podcast over the last couple of years has generated him over $200,000 of new revenue to his business. Very effective. I have another client that I worked with, Terry out of Georgia, manages over $400 million. It's purely based off of his COI relationships. He doesn't get really any referrals, or I should say he's not proactive with getting referrals from his client base. He just does it with the COIs. So there's so many different ways that you can go about it. It's, in my belief, and it actually ties into the book to a certain degree that you put in the form that I'm going to ask you about here shortly. It's, where do you derive your energy from? And just do that. And to your next point, I see that so often where people transition from, I got into this to be an advisor and help folks. And then they realize as they continue to grow, wow, I'm actually a business owner. So with that, let me kick that back over to you. I want to share some specific examples of what those systems can be.
Yeah, and I love that, Dave. And I'll just give one other piece of context to what you said, because I like how you outlined that. I will say, I think those at the highest level don't limit themselves to one. And not that you said that, right? But I think what you see oftentimes is they say, yeah, well, I only do COIs, or I'm only going to do cold calls, or I'm only going to ask for referrals. I think you need to find where you get your energy from and perfect that. But I think of it as like, ultimately, how many lines do you have in the water, right? So you should have a strategy for social media. You should have a strategy for client acquisition in the sales cycle, or you need strategies for all of those. You may not use every move every time. I think you're going to have one or two finishing moves, if you will, right, that are going to be your go-to. But I find that people are too quick to say, oh, I do it this way only. And I just don't believe, why would you ever limit yourself to that? So I agree. Whatever your primary move is, systematize that, but don't overlook the ones that you haven't done yet. just because you haven't done them yet.
I was waiting for you to say it, Aaron. I thought you were going to say the phrase that I've stolen from you as well, which is it's not an or scenario. It's an and scenario.
It's an and scenario. Yeah. So that's like you want to walk around my office and they'll say, let me guess, you said the end of the or, right? But it's true, right? And it's just always an and. And that's the thing that the brain creates a lot of invisible conflict, right? Mm-hmm. We say you can only do this or only do that, right? It's not real though, right? It's not you can only have a lot or good. Why can't you have a lot of good, right? So it's just, I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's an and everywhere. But to go off what we were talking about being a business owner, and I've even started to reframe that, at least in our firm. I have a little bit of recency bias here, but every quarter I have a day and a half where I just pick apart my calendar and just sit with my top teams and just talk. We consult, we riff, we push around ideas. I just want to keep giving them a different vantage point, pushing them a little bit to think differently. That was yesterday, by the way. So I got some real recency bias on that.
Fresh in your mind.
Yeah. I'm even realizing that I think the next evolution isn't even necessarily business owner, although that's real. I think it's leader. Right? Because I think they're tied together. But part of when I say business owner is it's actually like you have to know how to hire employees and develop them. But these teams, right, they are large teams, right? They are the size of big firms or medium-sized firms, I should say nowadays. And it's like they actually have to learn how to lead people and get the best out of them and inspire them and delegate. So we're realizing that most of the work I do with my top teams now is actually really similar to the work I do with my traditional leaders. It's about leadership development because they are no longer going to get rewarded for doing, right? They're going to get rewarded for being. And that's a challenge because I believe, at least this is the story for me, I think a lot of people that have been successful in our industry, they got to a certain point because they were the best at saying yes. They said yes more, they did more, and then they hit a ceiling and they realized, oh my God, I have to become the best at saying no. How the heck do I do that? And that whole art of delegating and elevating and empowering and inspiring, like that to me is the last missing link of a lot of these firms. And you know it from your work, from your podcast. You talk to the biggest firms out there. They're not talking about, how many new meetings they had. They're talking about who they're adding, how they're growing, how they're inspiring. So I think it's business owner. And I think we've unlocked a whole new tier of what's possible, which is being a great leader versus just a great business owner.
What I found is a lot of second, third, fourth, generation leaders in an organization, specifically the financial services industry. What I find is that, the person who, built the initial thing, whether it's in your model or a different model or whatever, there was just something about them that was dynamic enough to put this thing together with, duct tape. Right. And it worked. And then when they move on, that second generation leader or owner comes in, and looking back, what should have happened was that initial person should have done a better job of documenting the process as to how they got to where they were, so that as they were learning to fail, building off what we were talking about earlier, that can speed up that next person's learning curve. So within Northwestern's model, there's so much opportunity, not to say, hey, this is how you do it, but hey, here's what's worked in other businesses or other people's practices before. So I pick on a Jay Dentremont, he's built an amazing team. So making sure that that process is documented for the next Jay that comes into the fold, to skip a couple steps of, the pain that he's endured to, actually get to the point to where he's at right now. So I think that those quarterly things are awesome, but I would also make sure, and you're probably doing this, but make sure that you have a playbook, for lack of a better way to put it, where it's hey, here are the best practices, best principles, do with it as you will, but here's, millions of dollars of production has figured out.
Yeah, I love the way I frame that exact thing. I believe, because I think all of us need to do an increasingly better job at documenting and institutionalizing our systems, beliefs, and processes, right? We have to institutionalize our systems, beliefs, and processes because they work so together. Because I can look at your system, but if I don't know the belief behind what you have, I may not understand why you did that. And if I don't know the process to run it, I'm in trouble. So, I'm looking at that, candidly, it's an area I feel like I can be better at. Is I know what's going on in my brain, right? So somehow I think other people know how I arrived at a decision. And I don't always pause to institutionalize and document my systems, beliefs, and processes.
So I feel like we can, and I know we're both busy, so we can't, but I feel like we could, in theory, chat all day, because it's fun to riff with one another, but also we used to spend every day together, and we haven't, we don't do that anymore. So there's a lot to talk about, but to start wrapping this up. So for everyone listening, if you've listened to our show before, you know the deal, but if this is your first time listening, one thing that I've fallen back in love with over the last few years is reading and listening to books. And part of the purpose of the show is to make sure that we're doing a good job taking all the books that are out there and filtering them through our guests so that you can ensure that, or you can increase the likelihood that it's time well spent when you actually open up the cover or press play. So I always ask the guests, one of their favorite books or most impactful books happens to be, and this is a book that I've read at the very beginning of my career because you had suggested it, which is The Energy Bus. So tell me about why you chose The Energy Bus, which is funny because it's such like a simple book, but it has so much like impact and nuggets in there, but it's a quick read. So tell me, why you picked that and the impact that it's had on you and, folks like me who you've had the opportunity to lead.
Somewhat tongue in cheek. Part of the reason I picked it is what you already said. It was simple and easy to read. It's probably why I read it, not why it impacted on me. I think one of the reasons it had such a profound impact on me is because I feel like when we try to be a student of the game, or at least for me, the things that I tend to have been suggested to read or kind of the Mount Rushmore of books everyone talks about, they tend to be almost too steeped sometimes in data and science and research. And this is what this happens. And I like those too, because it's kind of how my brain works. What I loved about this book is it wasn't tied to financial services. It wasn't tied to sales. It wasn't tied to leadership. At the core, it was really a book about how to get the most out of your time in life. And at the general premise to me was that, your energy ultimately is the single biggest, I think, indicator of your performance in so many ways, Physical, emotional, and then all those different things go along with that. But the Energy Bus has this amazing way to take a super powerful message, break it down into a parable fashion, It reads really quickly. And it just had 3 or 4 things that, anyone who's ever read that book still talks about, If you read that book and you love it, you will say, oh my God, what an energy vampire. Like that phrase sticks with people. Who are those people in your life that sucking the energy out of you? So I just think it allowed me, and partially, Dave, honestly, was probably when I read it. It got referred to me at a point in time I needed it. I was kind of struggling a little bit with energy. So I just think it does such a unique, tremendous job of kind of letting you peel away all the fluff out there and just get to the point, which is if you don't know where you're going and you're not going with the right people and you're not showing up with your true 100% self, it don't really matter. It doesn't really matter. And I just think that whenever I've been off course in my life, I can usually go back to the fact that either I'm not treating myself the right way, I'm spending time with the wrong people, or I'm not doing the things I love. And that book just reminds me, and I probably read it, every 4 or 5 years. I dust it off the shelf. I hand it to somebody new. I'm a big fan of John Gordon, who's the author. I think he's got a great podcast. So his works, I just think, are really good. Now, you didn't ask this, but I'm going to volunteer it because it popped into my head. My favorite leadership author, which is a little bit different, is Patrick Lencioni, who's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, The Ideal Team Player, The Motive. I love everything he does just from a listener standpoint for those that are thinking about organizational health and how to get people going in the right direction. He also writes in parable fashion, so there's probably a theme there, but I think his podcast is dynamite. It's called At the Table, and he does some really cool quick hits just from a sharing standpoint on some things I listen to on the daily.
Love it. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I'm going to come back to the Energy Bus here in a moment, but I appreciate you spending some time now. If there's, folks who are listening today that want to connect with you or see what you have going on or check out, the firm that you run, where would you like to send them if they want to connect?
Yeah, if they want to get a peek or kind of just stay up to date with who we are, we really just try to drive people through our website. Me personally, Instagram's probably my most common thing, which is at MillerTime8730. I try to make it a blend of what I do personally and professionally and just have some fun with it. But, that's really a great way to connect with me. And, not to be the old guy in the room, but LinkedIn never hurts you.
Love it. Awesome. Well, for those of you who are listening, appreciate your time. Would really appreciate if you took a moment and shared the episode. There's a lot of value packed into this, 40, 50, 60 minutes or so, however long it's been. So please share that. Also, if you would be so kind as to leave us a review on iTunes, that would help us a lot. We found out a few weeks back that or at the point of this release, probably a couple months back, that we're in the top 2.5% of all podcasts globally, which is a result of all of you listening and sharing and reviewing. So appreciate that. So if you would be so kind as to leave a review, once that review posts, take a screenshot of that and then text that to me at 978-228-2338. Again, 978-228-2338. You'll get an automatic reply for you to click a link and just fill out your name. And then beyond that automatic reply, it's actually me texting you. And just send me that with Aaron with it, just the name Aaron. And going back to the energy bus, we have something that we coach on called an energy audit. So if you find that your energy is feeling drained or you're not getting as excited about your work as you typically, are used to, I'll walk you through that energy audit together as a thank you for doing that review. So if you think that would be helpful, feel free to shoot me that text and I'm happy to help along the way. So with that, Aaron, tell Lauren I said hello, my best to you, her, and the kids and everything that you have going on professionally. Always great to catch up. And I appreciate you spending some time today.
Yeah, David, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you. And, I get a lot of excitement seeing the success you're having. It's the reason we do what we do, man. So I appreciate you both.
Awesome. Take care.